Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy made his case for more aid in Washington today. He and President Biden held a joint press conference at the White House and both discussed the issue. Major Garrett and Nancy Cordes join us now. Major is a CBS News chief Washington correspondent, and Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent. Major, I want to start off with you. Obviously, a very passionate news conference from both presidents, but did President Zelenskyy move the needle during his visit here to Washington?
So for President Zelenskyy, the fate of $61 billion in aid for his country to continue to try to repel Russian aggression doesn't depend very much on what's going on with the president in the Oval Office or even in the office of Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. It has to deal with what is decided about what happens in the Rio Grande Valley. His country's fate really hangs in the balance because of disagreements over immigration policy. And until those disagreements are ironed out, or if they're ironed out, that aid is going to be held in abeyance. And that is a complicated place for Volodymyr Zelenskyy to be. He's not an expert on Rio Grande Valley and asylum claims and deportation or detention or the requisite number of judges to handle asylum claims. That's all beyond his realm. But House Republicans and Senate Republicans have made it fundamentally clear, unless the White House gives a lot of ground in that area of policy, in addition to border security money, this is not going to happen. And we just heard in the special report coverage, Scott McFarland saying, though there are movements, they're not nearly fast enough to resolve this before Congress intends to leave town, which is in the very near future. So this trip may all have raised an issue, raised rhetorical profiles, but not resolved anything.
Nancy, President Biden announced that he has approved another $200 million in military aid to Ukraine. What does that entail? And is there anything more that President Biden can do to make sure Ukraine gets the assistance it needs?
Nicole, the administration says it's basically scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. $200 million is kind of a drop in the bucket, believe it or not, compared to past drawdowns. It includes some munitions, artillery rounds. The Pentagon saying today that of the $100 billion or so that Congress has approved in the past, it only has about $5 billion left with which to purchase various weaponry that it has promised Ukraine and send it over there. So that is why the White House, the Pentagon Democrats in Congress have been sounding the alarms and saying that they really believe that another tranche of aid, that $61 billion that Major just referenced, needs to pass by the end of the year. But it is looking increasingly grim with the House and the Senate scheduled to leave in just a couple of days, and this very sticky negotiation that you just heard Major talking about over border security appearing to be at an impasse. This is an issue that has bedeviled Congress for more than a decade, and the notion that they could somehow quickly have a breakthrough in the next couple of days and vote on it, even just in the Senate, that's a pretty tall order.
Major Speaker Mike Johnson insists that he wants more clarity around this issue of, what this Ukraine aid is for, the path forward. Let's take a listen to his comments earlier today.
So I've made this very clear, again, from the very beginning, when I was handed the gavel. We needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars of the American citizens. And we needed a transformative change at the border. Thus far, we've gotten neither.
He seems pretty dug in there, and I know you said this has to be ironed out, but do you see the Speaker or House Republicans budging at all?
No, not on border security. And look, clarity on the strategy in Ukraine is in the eye of the beholder. You can work your way around that. What you can't work around is this insistence on border security. And for congressional Democrats in the Biden White House, they have to understand politically the ground is completely shifted away. We're not talking about comprehensive immigration reform here, Nicole. We're not talking about dreamers and all these other things that those on the Democratic side of the aisle would like to see achieved as a part. No, this is all about security. This is entirely on Republican policy grounds. And yes, the White House has signaled indirectly and directly that it's willing to make policy changes, but it's awfully late in the game. The only way that this has a chance of succeeding is if the White House gives so much ground and they start putting things on paper that they haven't put on paper yet, and House Republicans say it's worth sticking around to get these big policy changes they've been pushing for months. But until we see that kind of commitment, meaning the White House laying things out specifically and House Republicans saying, you know what, we'll wait a weekend, we'll wait into next week because this is so important. Absent that, this will all just linger and hover but be unresolved.
I mean, just kind of update our viewers, and I know many of them are plugged in, but just kind of how we got here, because typically there has been broad bipartisan support for Ukraine, which the president referenced.
Look, when the president made this pitch for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, Indo-Pacific also, and border security, he said they all should be together. House Republicans said, well, we're not really sure about that. We'll do the Israel part first, but you have to come back on border security. And the White House has been very slow to get to that point. Now they're hurrying up. Well, they've lost a lot of precious time. If they were going to make these concessions on border security, if they'd started to make them 2 or 3 weeks ago, this might have been a doable deal. The big question is now, can you, as Scott McFarland said and Nancy Cordes just said, move this so rapidly in ways that have never happened before? It's possible in theory. In practice, it's harder than anyone is currently willing to state out loud.
Nancy, the president said that his administration is working with Senate Democrats and Republicans to try to reach a compromise over Ukraine funding and these changes in border policy. What is the status of those talks?
Well, Nicole, just a couple of hours ago, our CBS colleague Camilo Montoya Valdez reported that actually there has been a major development, and that is that the White House is now making it clear that they actually might be willing to make some pretty significant changes to asylum policy in particular, make it easier to expel migrants who come to the U.S. applying for asylum, might make it easier to deport migrants who don't meet the qualifications. And, this has been something that has been very difficult to nail down for weeks. The president said very vaguely that he would be open to making changes to border policy. You heard him say it again in that press conference just a short time ago, but he hasn't gone into specifics. But now CBS News is reporting that the White House actually is open to specifics. And again, that is a move to try to hurry these conversations along, particularly on a day when the president of Ukraine is here in Washington. Obviously, it takes a lot to get him here. It takes a lot just to get him to leave the country because of the security concerns involved. And so the White House clearly trying to signal that that they are working at this. You had the Secretary of Homeland Security down on Capitol Hill today, meeting with lawmakers. So in the past few weeks, the White House has tried to stand back, tried not to get involved, tried to say that this is something that needs to be hammered out by Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans. Republicans said, no, we need to talk to the White House directly. You're the only ones who can really make and agree to these big changes. And it now looks like the White House is actually getting its feet wet and getting into these negotiations.
I mean, even though the administration seems to be willing to compromise a bit more here, at the end of the day, they did put border funding in their original supplemental request. I mean, is there any regret about doing that?
Not necessarily. I think they saw the writing on the wall. They knew that Republicans were going to see this Ukraine aid as great leverage to get something that they've been seeking for a long time, which is changes to border policy. And so they tried to preempt that by putting that money in this supplemental bill and kind of beating Republicans to the chase and saying, we're interested in dealing with the enormous surge in migrants that we've seen coming across the border. But what the White House was really thinking about were things like adding more border security personnel, adding more immigration judges so that asylum cases that right now take years to process could be processed more quickly. They were not talking about wholesale changes to border security policy. That is something that Democrats are typically only willing to entertain if major immigration changes that they support, things like a path to citizenship for the more than 11 million immigrants who are living here in this country undocumented, or new legal status for the Dreamers, for example. When those things are on the table, they are willing to deal. As Major noted, those things are not on the table in this situation, and yet the White House is still saying it is willing to make major policy changes on border security. That goes to show you that this is a problematic issue for this White House, and they know it. The election is coming up in less than 1 year. Voters consistently say in polls that immigration and border security is a big issue for them. And the White House is signaling that it's willing to go farther than it certainly ever has before.
And Major, if Congress leaves town without approving this funding for Ukraine, will that make it harder to pass it at the beginning of the year? And not only just harder for Ukraine funding, but Israel funding as well, funding for the Indo-Pacific? I
mean, not necessarily. It all depends on how aggressively the White House leans into these policy concessions it's now, as we're reporting, appearing to willing to make. You put that on paper, and there's heavyweight negotiations that go on through late December, early January. Congress comes back, maybe it's ready to go. And maybe only 2 or 3 weeks are lost. And no one really believes that 2 or 3 weeks are going to decide the fate of Ukraine's sovereignty. But everyone has to be really focused on that. Otherwise, this thing could drift. Now, Ukraine does not operate in isolation. It has many European partners. And one of the Republican criticisms about Ukraine aid is not so much on the aid, but is Europe doing enough? That's an open question. Ukraine will rely on European nations to step up. But European nations, as has been clear from the outset, take their signals from the strength and the resilience of U.S. support. So if U.S. support looks like it's in limbo, perhaps the European support will be as well. They are interlocked. So what Congress does on this and on the pace it does it matters a great deal.
Yeah, but speaking of that pace, we also know at the beginning of the year, they've got to deal with appropriations, keeping the government funded. Yes, I know they can walk and chew gum at the same time, but these are a lot of weighty issues.
No question. That's what I mean. If you're going to leave town, if Congress is going to leave town, then those who are going to be left behind, either via Zoom or other kind of communications during those 2 or 3 weeks, have to create something so when Congress does come back in early January, it's ready to go.
But do you think that's possible?
Anything is possible, Nicole. Probable, no. That's why this week is really super important. That's why the White House is leaning into it. And if it's going to make these concessions, doing so rapidly, again, to signal to House Republicans, hey, it's worth staying in town for, because you might get 80, 90% of what you asked for, which 3 months ago was a non-starter. Not my words, the White House's words. Maybe House Republicans will take that. We'll see.
Nancy, I want to turn to something else that President Biden mentioned. He also weighed in briefly on the war between Israel and Hamas. What were the key headlines?
Well, I think one of the biggest headlines was that he was not asked and did not address some of the comments that he made behind closed doors earlier today that were really eye-opening. He was at a fundraiser here in town, and without cameras rolling, but with a reporter present in the room, he unleashed probably his harshest criticism yet of the Israeli prime minister, particularly since this war began. He said that he basically doesn't agree with Bibi Netanyahu on anything, and he said, most critically, that he thinks it is probably time for Netanyahu to consider changing his cabinet, essentially making it less conservative than it is now. And that is something that you've heard from many other world leaders. It's something you've certainly heard from President Biden in the past before this conflict began, that he felt that this cabinet is too conservative. But he has withheld a lot of his criticism since this war began. He has shown unequivocal support for Israel. But clearly, his comments reflect a broader concern among members of his party that too many civilians have died in Gaza, that Israel is not, at least this current government, is not open to a two-state solution. And they're very concerned about the end game here. What happens after this war concludes, if it does, if the cabinet in its current form and with its current leader doesn't believe in a two-state solution? What happens then? And so President Biden was not asked about that at the podium today. He was asked about reports that the Israelis have begun flooding Hamas tunnels with seawater, which is something that had been foreshadowed for a couple of weeks now. He said that there had been reports that all the hostages were out of those tunnels because, as we know, there are still dozens of hostages, including some Americans, who are still being held in Gaza, but he said he didn't know that for sure. Those were reports coming out of the Middle East, and he doesn't know that for sure. When asked how long he believes this conflict should last, he didn't have a specific answer.
All right, Nancy Cordes at the White House for us tonight. Major Garrett, we thank you as always for being with us.